Hello, good people of YouTube, Mountbatten here, and today we are once again talking about the U.S. Battleship split tree. The very chunky ships, the Kansas, the Minnesota, and the Vermont. And the title of the video should give away what we're going to talk about today, and that is, so far, my experience in them has been rather quite good, surprisingly. And this is coming from me, someone that likes to brawl a lot, and ships that aren't meant to brawl, but surprisingly can if the situation arises, and the situation will arise, and we're going to talk about when it does today, and about some other ups and downs of the other ships that I'm noticing so far. So I guess this could also kind of be a pseudo Minnesota second impression video if you wish, because we will be using the Minnesota for reference, because that is the ship that I have right now. Vermont is not out, and I do not have Kansas yet, but I've heard reports that Kansas is actually quite good. It's essentially a tier 8 Montana, and is quite powerful. So yeah, the line, and if you don't know, these are supposed to be sniping battleships. They are basically a what-if design if the U.S. stuck with the super dreadnought designs and did not go with the fast battleship designs like they did in real life. So essentially, each ship is a bigger Colorado, except with more guns. And the line will be splitting at Colorado, and you'll be going from the Colorado to the Kansas to the Minnesota, and then to the Vermont. And the Kansas and Minnesota both have 12 16-inch guns. The Vermont has 12 18-inch guns. The downsides, though, is that the Vermont has the Vermont and the Minnesota have 40-second reloads in order to compensate for having that many guns. And they are also very accurate guns, as I've been coming to find out. They aren't incredibly accurate per se. The vertical dispersion is honestly negligible in most cases. The horizontal dispersion is, well, it's there, but all the shells basically spread out in one line that's very conveniently pretty much the length of most cruisers that you'll be fighting against. So if a cruiser is showing you broadside, they will pay the price quite heavily too, again with 12 16-inch or 12 18-inch shells. And from what we've seen of the Vermont so far, it is literally just Minnesota, but 1.95 Sigma and 18-inch guns, which, if it really is going to be that and stay like that, then boy, Vermont's going to be quite scary. Now, the downside to the ship is that they are, of course, absolutely massive, and they have a top speed of 23 knots, which, again, honestly, I thought was going to be a huge issue. But like I said in my Minnesota first impressions review, in the match that I played with her, it really wasn't that much of an issue. And as I've continued to play Minnesota throughout the weekend, it's not an issue most times, but when it is an issue, it is a huge issue. Now, the Minnesota and the American split line, well, if you just go to the wrong flank, you are kind of boned. What I mean is that if you go to the flank that's the enemy team's off flank, and you have to travel across the entire map in order to get back into the battle, you just can't. You really can't. You don't have the time. Now, you do have incredible range, though. So you really only have to get about halfway there to start to get into the fight, but again, with a 23 knot top speed, it's just not happening. However, I haven't run across this issue too much. This only crops up in blowout matches when, the team just lemmings to one side and there's only one or two ships that went to the other side of the map that you just so happen to spawn on, or the cap that you went to is just, there's only two ships. That's only the cases that I found out that this has been a major issue. And, I mean, if you did this in any other ship, any other battleship at least, you would be doing far below your average damage in that match regardless, be it you only did 50 or 40,000 damage in like the Montana or the Yami, just because you didn't have enough target to shoot at before the match ended. It's just that when it happens with the Minnesota and again with the other American split battleships, you do just way less damage because of the RPM of your guns. And then you can't really get to the other side in time. With the other battleships, they can go over 30 knots. You can at least get to the other side to get, a couple of salvos in, and with the Minnesota and such, you can't, because you don't have the speed and you don't have the RPM to really do that. And the RPM is, of course, a huge downside to these ships. That 40-second reload on the Minnesota and Vermont. However, with how consistent these guns are, somebody who's very good at playing a sniper, so like the Yami, the Slava, the Thunder, if you're good in those ships, you're going to be amazing in these thick boys because they're so consistent. It is incredible how consistent these shells are. I can't remember too often the shells doing the whole flying all over the place salvos like many other battleships experience. Even the Montana, with that special USBB plotting room mod 2 module equipped, still has those salvos. I think I can maybe remember it happening 3 times so far in the Minnesota. And so far in the Minnesota, from playing it over the weekend, I've done really well in it. My average damage in it is, if it's not at 100k right now, it is very close to that mark. And I've had several games that are 150k and above, which by tier 9 standards, that's pretty darn good. And the thing is, too, this is just in the Minnesota, which is the tier 9. And if we're all being honest here, tier 9 battleships are normally not exactly the shining jewel of the tech line, except for like the Alsace. The Ismo isn't that great. The Iowa's pretty decent, but it's not fantastic. The FDG is, it's been called the worst battleship in the game sometimes. The Sovietsky Soyuz isn't that great either. It's pretty tanky, but 16-inch guns and a 33-second reload on 9 guns, and so forth and so on. So it's not exactly the normal best ship in the tier in the tech tree, and I'm doing this in that ship. Now, it could be the case that for whatever weird reason, the Minnesota is the shining jewel in the split tech tree. Although, from what I've heard, it's actually more than likely going to be the Kansas. But still, take everything that the Minnesota has and just give it 18-inch guns with better Sigma and better dispersion at range and better range, and then you got a Vermont. That's absolutely just, it's off the chunk scale how chunky the Vermont is. And again, very similar armor layout and stuff. Again, torpedo bulges everywhere, which it's weird. The armor scheme of the Minnesota and these ships, you have the torpedo bulges that if people shoot there, where they would normally pin you, they would either just bounce off or get the torpedo protection hit with the shells, or they could shoot you in the bow or stern area, where if you watch the Minnesota First Impressions video, you have those random like 200mm plates there, where when you would normally be bow in and angled enough to bounce the shells, because those plates there, they can pin those plates and get full damage pins off of that, or when you're angled correctly, they can also bounce off of those plates, and it's weird. The ship's chunky. It does get chunked a bit, but where you would normally get bounces, you get pin, and where you normally get pin, you get bounces. It's weird, and I guess the side effect of having massive torpedo bulges over most of the ship. But the A is also pretty decent as well. It's nothing fantastic, nothing terrible. And again, after the CV changes, after the accidental CV changes, the jury's still out on that. We'll see how those compared to say like 2 or 3 weeks down the road after working has had some time to hammer out these changes. Now, in the case of you getting overran, which was something that I cited a lot in the American BB's going to be DOA video, it's weird. I don't know if people just see you and they've heard from other places around the interwebs that the USBBs aren't great and aren't that much of a threat. But what's been happening with me, at least, and again, this could just be the teams that I'm getting, or just my luck, people just let me go for whatever reason, and only 1 or 2 ships will come after me, or will focus me down. And again, I don't know if it's just because they've heard it's bad, and they just assume that you're a non-threat, but like in the match you're watching right now, the Atlanta and the Baltimore just friggin' ignored me and went chasing after the DD. And I managed to bait the Iowa into chasing me, and dragged him across the entire map to where even with the Iowa speed, he couldn't get back into the fight. And this happens a lot. Now, you do have the occasional rather intelligent team that will focus you down, because you should focus down BBs, especially lone BBs. That's how you take them. You don't, let them run off and escape. But again, that's not necessarily a trait of the ship. That's just the mindset of them right now. I'm sure that'll change once the full line gets released. But that's just been my experience with that so far, and that could be why. Well, actually, it is one reason why I'm doing so well. Is just the teams that seem to be ignoring me right now, which normally doesn't happen, because one, I get recognized, and that immediately makes everybody want to kill me. Two, I'm in an early access ship, and normally, hey, new ship, let's absolutely melt it. But I've had that happen, but I have had the whole just ignore him and let him run scenario happen, well, quite a bit more often than the other scenario. But not even taking that into consideration, the ships do seem to be pretty good. And surprisingly, in a brawl, when you're forced to brawl, because you will be, because again, you can't run away from any other battleship, they don't do that bad. Especially with the 12 16-inch guns of the Minnesota. Now, granted, they are only 16-inch guns. They do have a 40-second reload, so that kind of sucks. But if you just nose in or stern in, and if it's not something like the Yami, you can just bounce the shells there. And then the ships are surprisingly maneuverable. They get the U.S. Dreadnought turning radius, which means it has a very, very, very tight turning radius, and actually a pretty darn good rudder shift time with that as well. So you can quickly rotate your ship around, get your guns off, then rotate it back before the enemy ship has time to fire at you, or has time for his guns to reload, I should say. And then you can also bait them pretty darn hard by faking a turn and then turning back the other way to try and get them to, mismaneuver. I've been doing that a lot, and it's quite fun. Granted, the ships are obviously not meant for brawling, even though they do have a underwater citadel and plenty of guns, but the secondaries aren't that great, and the armor, while it's pretty decent, as you're watching right here with the eye, he's still managing to chunk me at times as well. But overall, I just wanted to make this video because I was surprised that these ships are actually pretty darn good. The guns are absolutely fantastic. The armor is trollish. It's kind of like the French baguette armor, where again, where you would expect to get pinned, you get bounces, and where you expect to get bounces, you get pinned. So it's kind of that double-edged sword type of deal with the armor. Seems to be pretty good for now. The maneuverability of these ships is great, even though their speed isn't fantastic. And the guns, I just cannot stress this enough. The guns are amazing on the Minnesota. So again, take all this, put this on the Vermont, but just give it 18-inch guns, 12 18-inch guns with a 40-second reload time. It's looking like it's probably going to be a pretty good ship. Now, the whole argument of, is this good for the game, promoting this kind of sitting back at the sniping game style. I don't like that game style. I don't think it's healthy for the game, but mechanically speaking, these ships are pretty good. But again, like we talked about in the Slava First Impressions review, just because a ship is good, that doesn't mean it's necessarily good for the game. So while I do think that these ships are good, I don't think they're good for the game. I would have much rather preferred these to be more of a mid-range, absolute just chunky tank boys, rather than a long-range, just chunky boys, You guys should know that I have explained that a bit in the What Would I Do with the USBB video that I put out a couple weeks ago, so go watch that if you want to see what I wanted these ships to be. But again, mechanically, so far they seem to be pretty good. We'll see how this line evolves, if it gets nerfed or it gets changed. But as of right now, I do believe they are quite a good line, and you guys will be able to get your hands on them in a couple of patches or so. I think the next patch is part 2 of the early access event. No, I'm sorry. Next patch, I do believe we do get the full line. My bad. But we shall see when that comes out, and you guys can get your hands on them. Guys, that's what I think about these ships so far. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. We're on our way to 20,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you guys enough for that. Hope you're all having a wonderful Tuesday. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.